He owned the city skyline, a kingdom of glass and steel built on ruthless ambition. She was just a ghost moving through it, serving champagne with a practiced smile and invisible hands. For billionaire Sterling Croft, the waitress was less than a person, a prop in his opulent world, an easy target for a cruel game. He ordered her to the grand piano, expecting a clumsy, humiliating spectacle to entertain his jeering guests. What he didn't know was that her hands, calloused from work, once knew the keys like an extension of her own soul. He wanted to mock her poverty. Instead, she was about to compose his public ruin. The air in Sterling Croft's penthouse was thin and sharp, smelling of money and expensive perfume. It clung to the back of the throat, a taste Maya Rodriguez had come to associate with a specific kind of gilded misery. From her vantage point near a towering marble column, she watched the city sprawl below a glittering tapestry of 1,000,000 lives she would never know, all dwarfed by the sheer arrogance of the room she was paid to be invisible in. Sterling's parties were legendary, less celebrations, and more demonstrations of power. The guest list was a curated collection of New York's elite tech titans with hollow eyes, real estate moguls with predatory smiles, and their impossibly thin wives draped in jewels that could have paid off Maya's family's medical debt 10 times over. They moved through the cavernous, minimalist space like sharks in a custom-built aquarium, their laughter sharp and brittle. Maya adjusted the strap of her catering tray, the weight of a dozen champagne flutes digging into her shoulder. For 2 years, this had been her life. Days were spent in a cramped apartment in Queens, poring over medical textbooks and fielding worried calls from her younger brother. Nights were spent in places like this, balancing trays and dignity, the meager earnings channeled directly into the black hole of her father's long-term care facility. Each clinking glass, each dismissive glance was a small price to pay for his survival. Another round, quickly a voice snapped, and Maya turned to see Victoria Davenport, Sterling's fiancée, flicking her fingers in Maya's direction without making eye contact. Victoria was carved from ice, beautiful and severe, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a chignon so tight it seemed to pull her features into a permanent state of disdain. Maya nodded, her face a neutral mask she had perfected. Of course, Miss Davenport. She navigated the clusters of people, her movements fluid and efficient. She had learned to anticipate needs to appear and disappear as required, a skill honed by years of trying not to be a burden. Her father used to say she moved like a whisper. Now she was just another part of the background hum. At the center of it all, holding court by the floor-to-ceiling windows, was Sterling Croft himself. He wasn't classically handsome. His power was his most attractive feature. It radiated from him, a palpable force that bent the room to his will. He had a reputation for being a titan in the tech industry and a tyrant in his personal life. Tonight he was in his element, a glint of cruel amusement in his dark eyes as he surveyed his domain. He was locked in a verbal sparring match with his chief rival Sebastian Blackwood. Blackwood was different. Where Sterling was all sharp edges and loud pronouncements, Blackwood possessed a quiet, watchful intensity. He was old money with a lineage that stretched back through the city's history, and he carried himself with an assurance Sterling's new money could never quite buy. The tension between them was a low thrum beneath the party's noise. "You see, Sebastian Sterling," said his voice carrying easily over the chatter, "it's all about acquiring the best." The best art, he gestured to a massive, chaotic painting that looked to Maya like a paint factory explosion, the best view, the best company. He draped a possessive arm around Victoria, who smiled a predator's smile. Some things can't be acquired, Sterling. They must be earned, or appreciated. Sebastian countered smoothly, his gaze sweeping the room with a cool detachment that seemed to infuriate Sterling. Sterling's eyes narrowed. He needed to win always. His gaze scanned the room, searching for a pawn, a prop to make his point. And then his eyes landed on Maya. She was refilling glasses near the magnificent ebony Fazioli grand piano that dominated one corner of the room. It was the only thing in the penthouse that felt alive to her, the only object that didn't feel sterile and soulless. It was a monstrously beautiful instrument, its polished surface reflecting the city lights like a black, still lake. She had been careful to avoid it all night, the sight of it a dull ache in her chest. For her, a piano wasn't just furniture. It was a graveyard of dreams. Appreciation. Sterling laughed a harsh, grating sound. Let me demonstrate. He raised his voice, a theatrical boom that silenced the nearest conversations. You waitress. Every head turned. Maya froze, the blood draining from her face. The spotlight she had spent her life avoiding was now blindingly upon her. She felt 100 pairs of eyes slice into her, dissecting her cheap black uniform, her worn-out flats, her plain, forgettable face. Yes, you, Sterling said, a malicious grin spreading across his face. He beckoned her forward. Come here. Slowly, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, Maya placed her tray on a nearby table and walked toward him. The space between her and Sterling felt miles long. She could feel Victoria's smug stare, Sebastian Blackwood's curious frown. What is your name, Sterling? Asked, his tone that of a king addressing a scullery maid. Maya, sir. Her voice was barely a whisper. Maya, he repeated, tasting the name with theatrical contempt. Well, Maya, my friend, Sebastian here, thinks I don't appreciate the finer things. He believes in hidden talents, in diamonds in the rough. He gestured grandly to the Fazioli. Tell me, Maya, do you play? The question hit her like a physical blow. It was so specific, so cruelly ironic, that for a moment she thought he must somehow know. But a glance at his mocking face told her it was just a random, vicious whim. He expected her to say no, to stammer and blush, proving his point that the lower classes were devoid of the culture he so effortlessly possessed. A bitter, metallic taste filled her mouth. Say no, her mind screamed. Just say no, and walk away. But then she saw it. The smug, triumphant look on Victoria's face, the bored amusement of the crowd, the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of the man in front of her. And something inside her, something she thought had died long ago, sparked to life. It was a tiny, defiant ember of the girl she used to be. A little she said, her voice quiet, but clear, shocking herself as much as anyone else. Sterling's eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise, which quickly morphed into delight. This was even better than he had hoped. A clumsy, amateurish performance would be far more humiliating than a simple denial. A little he boomed to the room. Did you hear that? She plays a little wonderful perfect. He turned to Sebastian, his eyes gleaming. I'll make you a wager. $100,000 for your ridiculous charity. If she can play anything at all that remotely resembles music, you win. But when she makes a fool of herself, you admit that my new acquisition algorithm is superior to your gut feelings in the market. Sebastian Blackwood stared at Sterling, his expression one of utter disgust. This isn't a wager, Sterling. This is cruelty. Don't be a bore, Sterling scoffed. He turned back to Maya, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial yet carrying whisper. "Don't be shy now. Go on. Entertain us. Play us a little tune. Chopsticks, perhaps." The crowd tittered. Victoria let out a delicate, cruel laugh. Maya stood frozen, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. He was not just mocking her, he was desecrating a memory. The piano was her mother's sanctuary, the one place where her brilliant, troubled mind had found peace. To use it as a tool for this man's petty spectacle felt like sacrilege. She looked past Sterling's sneering face to the piano, the fazioli. Her mother had always dreamed of playing a fazioli. She'd talked about their sound, not just notes, but colors, textures, entire worlds, held within the spruce and steel. One day, Miha, her mother, used to say, her fingers dancing over the worn ivory of their ancient upright, "We will make music that echoes." The echo had been silenced by a screech of tires on a rainy night. And now this man, this hollow, gilded man, wanted her to play chopsticks on her mother's dream. A cold calm washed over her. The fear receded, replaced by a strange, quiet fury. It wasn't about the money or the humiliation or the crowd. It was about the music. It was about her mother. He wanted a show. Fine, she would give him one, but it would be on her terms. Without another word, she turned her back on Sterling Croft and began the long, silent walk to the fazioli grand piano. The room watched, holding its collective breath, anticipating a train wreck. Maya didn't see them. She only saw the 88 keys waiting for her like old friends who thought she had forgotten them. The walk to the piano was the longest of Maya's life. Each step was a thunderclap in the sudden, expectant hush of the room. The ambient chatter had died, replaced by a palpable, voyeuristic curiosity. She felt hundreds of eyes on her back, each one a pinprick against her skin. They weren't seeing a person. They were seeing a spectacle, a diversion. The help is about to make a fool of herself. How quaint. Her cheap, rubber-soled shoes made no sound on the polished obsidian floor. It felt as if she were floating in a dark, silent void, the only point of light, the gleaming, monstrously large piano ahead. It sat on a raised platform, a veritable altar to music, making the act of approaching it feel both sacred and sacrificial. She could hear Victoria's sharp, condescending whisper to a friend. "Can you imagine? He's actually letting her touch it. The oils from her hands." The voice trailed off in a wave of derisive giggles. Maya's jaw tightened. Oils from her hands. These hands had changed her father's bandages, scrubbed floors, and carried the weight of her family's broken world. These hands were tired and calloused, but they remembered. Oh, they remembered. She reached the piano bench. It was upholstered in rich black leather, cool and smooth to the touch. Sitting down felt like a transgression. This was a throne built for giants of the art form, for the Polinis and Uchidas of the world, not for a waitress from Queens who hadn't touched a real piano in 5 years. Her own piano, the rickety upright she'd grown up with, had been sold long ago to cover the first of many hospital bills. Since then, the only keys she'd touched were on a silent cardboard printout she used to keep her fingers limber, a pathetic secret ritual performed late at night when the grief was too loud to sleep through. She stared down at the keyboard. The keys were pristine, a stark contrast of flawless white and bottomless black. They weren't ivory like her mother's old piano, yellowed and chipped with a history of love and use. These were perfect, sterile, intimidating. They seemed to mock her, to challenge the very memory of her touch. For a terrifying moment, her mind went blank. The notes, the scales, the years of relentless training. Her mother had drilled into her. It all vanished, leaving only the roaring silence of the room and the suffocating weight of expectation. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling. She could feel Sterling's smug, triumphant gaze boring into her. He was already savoring his victory. She imagined the clumsy, discordant sound of a wrong note, the explosion of laughter that would follow the crushing weight of the humiliation. It would be a confirmation of everything he believed, that breeding and wealth were synonymous with worth, and that she and everyone like her were simply background noise. From the corner of her eye she saw Sebastian Blackwood. He wasn't smiling or sneering. His expression was one of intense, focused observation, mixed with a hint of something that looked like empathy. It was a jarring, unexpected detail in a sea of contempt. He wasn't watching a waitress. He was watching a woman being led to a figurative execution. She took a deep, shuddering breath, closing her eyes. The scent of champagne and judgment faded. The image of the sneering crowd dissolved. She needed an anchor, a memory to cling to in this storm of hostility. She found it in the scent of rain-soaked pavement and her mother's lavender perfume. She is 10 years old. A storm rages outside, but inside their small living room is a sanctuary. Her mother, Sophia, sits beside her at the upright, her presence a warm, calming force. Maya's fingers stumble over a difficult passage in a Chopin nocturne. Frustration brings tears to her eyes. "I can't," she whimpers. "It's too hard." Sophia doesn't scold her. She simply places her own long, elegant fingers over Maya's. "Music isn't in the notes, Mija. It's in the space between them. It's in the breath you take before you play. It's your heart speaking when words are not enough. Forget the audience. Forget the composer, even. For just a moment, find your own story in the music. What is it you want to say? What is it you want to say?" Maya opened her eyes. The trembling in her hands stopped. The cold calm returned, solidifying into a core of pure, unadulterated resolve. She knew what she wanted to say. She wanted to speak of love and loss, of dreams shattered and promises kept, of the quiet dignity of survival. She would not play their game. She would not play Chopin or Bach or any of the masters they might recognize and judge. She would play for an audience of one. Her mother. She flexed her fingers, the knuckles cracking softly in the silent room. She adjusted her posture, straightening her back, just as her mother had taught her. She was no longer Maya Rodriguez, the catering waitress. She was Sophia's daughter. She lifted her hands, held them suspended over the keys for a single heart-stopping moment. And then she began to play. The first note was not loud or dramatic. It was a single soft, questioning tone in the middle register. It hung in the air, delicate and pure, cutting through the thick, expectant atmosphere like a shard of glass. It was a sound so beautiful, so perfectly rendered, that it seemed to stun the room into an even deeper silence. There was no tittering now. There was only that one perfect note resonating from the heart of the Fazioli. Then a second note joined it, creating a harmony that was both melancholic and hopeful. And a third and a fourth. A slow, haunting melody began to unfold a simple, heart-breaking theme that spoke of deep, quiet sorrow. It was not chopsticks. It was not a familiar classic. It was something else entirely. Something no one in that room had ever heard before. The initial shock on the faces of the guests, began to slowly, almost imperceptibly, transform. The sneers faded, replaced by frowns of confusion, then by wide-eyed disbelief. Victoria Davenport's smug smile faltered her painted lips, parting slightly in astonishment. Sterling Croft, standing with his arms crossed, felt a jolt, as if the floor had tilted beneath him. This was not the clumsy fumbling he had anticipated. This was music. Real music. The melody was intricate, weaving a tapestry of complex emotions that was at once deeply personal and universally understood. It was the sound of a heart breaking, not with a loud crash, but with a slow, silent crack. He looked from Maya's back, straight and proud, no longer the posture of a servant, to the face of Sebastian Blackwood. The empathy was gone from Blackwood's expression, replaced by an electrifying, predatory focus. He was leaning forward slightly, his eyes fixed on Maya's hands as they moved across the keys, his head tilted as if he were deciphering a code. He didn't just hear music. He was listening. And in that moment, Sterling felt the first unfamiliar pang of having made a terrible, terrible mistake. The spotlight he had intended as a tool of humiliation was no longer his. It now belonged entirely to the waitress. The melody that flowed from the fazioli was a living thing. It started as a lament, a stream of sorrowful notes that seemed to speak of a long-held grief. It was the sound of twilight of memories, fading at the edges of a persistent hollow ache. Maya kept her eyes closed, her body swaying gently with the rhythm she was creating. She was no longer in a billionaire's penthouse. She was back in the cluttered, love-filled living room of her childhood. Her mother's presence, a warm shadow beside her. The piece was called Elegy for a Lost Star. Her mother, Sofia Rodriguez, had composed it. It was her magnum opus, a piece she had labored over for years, pouring into it all her frustrated ambition, her fierce love for her daughter, and her premonition of a life that would be cut short. She was a genius without a stage, a composer without an audience, a star no one had ever seen. As Maya played, the music began to change. The initial simple sorrow deepened, evolving into a far more complex and turbulent emotional landscape. The left hand, which had been providing a gentle arpeggiated foundation, became a thundering, powerful counterpoint. It was the sound of a storm breaking of anger and defiance, raging against the cruelty of fate. The tempo quickened, the notes cascading from the piano in a furious, breathtaking torrent. The party guests were utterly captivated, their champagne flutes forgotten in their hands. They were no longer a crowd of sneering socialites. They were a silent, spellbound audience. They didn't understand the technical brilliance required to execute such a piece, the impossibly fast arpeggios, the complex polyrhythms, the sheer stamina required, but they understood the emotion. It was raw, unfiltered, and devastatingly human. It was an emotion none of them had likely allowed themselves to feel in years. Flashback. Maya is 15. Her hands fly across the keys of the old upright, but her heart isn't in it. She wants to be at the mall with her friends, not practicing this dark, difficult piece her mother is so obsessed with. "Mama, it's too sad," she complains. "Why can't we play something happy?" Sophia stops her. Her eyes, usually so bright, are shadowed with a weariness Maya doesn't understand. Life is not always happy, Mija. True art doesn't hide from the darkness. It confronts it. It finds the light within it. She points to a passage, a brief lyrical melody, tucked between two thunderous chords. You see this? This is the hope, the memory of sunlight in the middle of the storm. You must play the storm to earn the sunlight. Now again. From the heart. Maya's fingers found that passage now. After the furious, roaring climax, the music suddenly softened. The storm broke, giving way to a melody of such exquisite, heartbreaking beauty that it felt like a tentative dawn after a long, dark night. It was the sunlight, the memory of her mother's smile, the echo of her laughter, the feeling of her hand on her shoulder. It was a love letter to a ghost. Tears she hadn't realized were forming began to stream down Maya's cheeks, falling silently onto the pristine black and white keys. But she did not falter. The tears were part of the music now, each drop a liquid note of love and loss. She poured every ounce of her 5 years of repressed grief, every lonely night, every sacrifice, every moment of quiet desperation into the performance. Across the room, standing near a bookshelf, a man with silver hair and a deeply lined face stood utterly transfixed. This was Arthur Kensington, the chief music critic for the New York Times, a man whose opinion could make or break careers. He had only come tonight as a favor to Sebastian Blackwood, whose family were long-time patrons of the arts. He had expected to be bored to tears. Instead, he was witnessing a miracle. He was a scholar of modern and obscure compositions. The piece the girl was playing was a masterpiece of construction and emotional depth. The structure was reminiscent of Rachmaninoff in its romantic grandeur, yet the harmonic language was entirely unique, modern and daring. It was a work of staggering genius, and he had never heard it before. It was impossible. A work of this caliber did not simply exist in a vacuum. Who was this girl? And more importantly, who was the composer? Sterling Croft stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. The control he so cherished had evaporated. The room, his room, was no longer his. It belonged to the music. It belonged to the waitress he had tried to break. He watched her, this insignificant girl, command the attention of some of the most powerful people in the city, with nothing but a piano. The wager, the algorithm, his petty rivalry with Sebastian, it all seemed so small, so pathetic in the face of the monumental sound filling the room. He felt a strange and terrifying sensation. He was being erased from his own party. Victoria, ever the pragmatist, was doing a rapid, cold calculation. The sheer, undeniable power of the performance was shifting the social dynamics of the room in real time. The ridicule she had anticipated had transformed into awe. Sterling, her powerful, indomitable fiancé, looked small. He looked weak, and weakness was something Victoria could not afford to be associated with. Her gaze shifted from Sterling's stunned face to the absorbed, intense profile of Sebastian Blackwood. The final section of the piece was one of quiet acceptance. The grand, passionate themes resolved into a simple, recurring motif like a lullaby. It was the sound of peace found through pain, of a love that transcends even death. The notes became softer, sparser, until only a single high bell-like tone remained. Maya held the last note, letting it hang in the air, shimmering until it slowly, naturally faded into absolute silence. She kept her hands on the keys for a moment longer, her head bowed. The final echo of her mother's soul dissipated into the perfumed air of the penthouse. Then slowly she let her hands fall into her lap. The silence that followed was profound. It was not the awkward silence of an ended conversation, but the sacred silence that follows a shared transformative experience. It stretched for 5, then 10 seconds. It felt like an eternity. No one seemed to breathe. Then from the back of the room, a single person began to clap. It was Arthur Kensington. He was not clapping politely. He was applauding with a fervent, thunderous energy, his face filled with an expression of profound respect and wonder. His applause broke the spell. Suddenly, the entire room erupted. It was not polite party applause. It was a roar, a standing ovation. People who had been sneering minutes before were now on their feet, their faces alight with genuine, unadulterated awe. They were clapping for the waitress, the ghost, the girl they hadn't even seen. Maya slowly lifted her head, her vision blurred by tears. She saw the room, but it was different now. The faces were no longer cruel or mocking. They were stunned, moved, humbled. She had spoken in the only language she had left, and they had impossibly understood. She looked at Sterling Croft. He was not clapping. He was staring at her, his face pale, his mouth slightly agape. In his eyes, she saw not anger, but a raw, unsettling mixture of shock and humiliation. He had lit a match to mock her, and she had used it to start a forest fire. The applause rolled through the penthouse like a tidal wave, a sound of pure, unadulterated admiration that washed over Maya, leaving her feeling dizzy and exposed. She slowly rose from the piano bench, her legs unsteady. She felt as though she had just woken from a long, intense dream, and the reality of her surroundings came crashing back in. The faces no longer sneering were now staring at her with a new kind of intensity, a mixture of awe, curiosity, and for some, a dawning sense of their own recent boorishness. She wanted to flee. Her purpose had been fulfilled. She had defended her mother's memory, her own soul, and in the process had silenced the man who tried to use her as a prop. But she was rooted to the spot, trapped in the center of the adulation. "Magnificent, absolutely magnificent." A voice cut through the applause. Arthur Kensington, the critic, was striding toward her, his face flushed with an excitement that made him look 20 years younger. He pushed past a bewildered-looking tech billionaire and a statuesque socialite, his eyes fixed only on Maya. "My dear girl," he said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion as he reached her. He didn't offer to shake her hand, but instead clasped his own together, as if in prayer. "In 40 years of reviewing, I have never been so completely blindsided by a performance. The passion, the technique, the soul. It was breathtaking." Maya simply stared, overwhelmed. "Thank you," she managed to whisper the words, feeling inadequate. "But I must know." Kensington pressed his eyes, burning with intellectual fire. "The composition. I know every major work of the last century. I know the obscure ones, the experimental ones. I have never heard that piece before. It is a work of sheer genius. It cannot possibly be unpublished. Tell me, what was it?" The room quieted again, the guests leaning in, eager to hear the answer. The performance was one thing, the mystery of the music itself was another. Sterling watched this exchange, a cold dread coiling in his stomach. The narrative of the evening had been violently rent from his control. He was now a bystander at his own party, forgotten in the wake of the waitress's triumph. He saw Sebastian Blackwood approaching the small circle forming around Maya. His expression unreadable, but intensely focused. Maya took a breath, her gaze sweeping past Kensington to land for a brief moment on Sterling's pale, shocked face. She would not direct her answer to the kind critic. She would direct it to him. "It is unpublished," she said, her voice gaining strength, ringing with a quiet, clear pride. "It was written by my mother. Her name was Sophia Rodriguez." She looked directly at Sterling. She was a composer. She called the piece Elegy for a Lost Star. A collective gasp went through the small crowd of onlookers. Her mother. The waitress hadn't just performed a difficult piece. She had performed a personal testament, a work of inherited genius. The story had just become infinitely more compelling. Arthur Kensington looked as though he'd been struck by lightning. Sophia Rodriguez Viveur. "I don't know the name." He said it not as a dismissal, but as a confession of a shocking gap in his own encyclopedic knowledge, which clearly pained him. But Sebastian Blackwood, who had been listening intently, took a sharp step forward. His face, usually a study in controlled neutrality, was now alive with sudden dawning recognition. "Rodriguez," he said, his voice low but carrying. "Wait a moment. Sophia Rodriguez. She wasn't by any chance a finalist for the Davenport Grant about 20 years ago, was she?" The mention of the name Davenport sent a ripple through the group. Victoria, who had been trying to position herself near Sebastian, froze. The Davenport Foundation for Classical Music was her family's legacy, one of the most prestigious and powerful arts endowments in the country, currently chaired by her father. Maya's eyes widened. She had only vaguely known the details. Her mother had been too heartbroken to speak of it much. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, she was. How did you know that?" Sebastian's gaze was sharp and piercing. "My family were founding patrons of that grant. I remember my grandfather talking about that year. He was on the judging panel. He said there was a scandal. A brilliant unknown composer, a woman of color from a poor background, was the clear front runner. Her submission was so far beyond the others, he called it a generational talent." He paused, and his eyes flickered towards Victoria, a subtle but unmistakable accusation in their depths. And then at the last minute, her submission was disqualified on a technicality, something about a missing signature on one of the forms. The grant and the massive career boost that came with it went to the runner-up, a far less talented, but much better connected composer. My grandfather resigned from the board in protest. He always said it was the single most dishonest act he'd ever witnessed in the art world. He said they didn't just deny her a prize, they buried a genius. The silence that followed this revelation was thick with implication. Victoria Davenport's face had gone from smug to shocked to chalk white. The name of her family's foundation, a symbol of their cultural supremacy, had just been linked to a story of corruption and stolen dreams, and the ghost they had buried had just been spectacularly resurrected in the middle of her engagement party. Every eye in the room now saw the connection. The Davenport Grant. Victoria Davenport. Sterling Croft's fiancée. The pieces clicked into place with an audible, sickening snap. Arthur Kensington stared at Victoria, his expression of awe now curdling into one of journalistic fury and disgust. A major story, a story of injustice and rediscovery, was unfolding right in front of him. But it was Sterling who felt the final killing blow. This wasn't just a humiliation anymore. This was a catastrophe. He had not just picked a random waitress to mock. He had, through sheer blind arrogance, picked the one person in the entire city whose story was a direct indictment of the family he was about to marry into. He had handed his rival Sebastian Blackwood a weapon of mass social destruction and pointed it at himself. Sebastian's gaze shifted from the horrified Victoria to the dumbfounded Sterling. There was no triumph in his eyes, only a cold, quiet contempt. "You wanted to demonstrate the value of acquiring the best," Sebastian said, his voice a low, cutting blade. "It seems your fiancé's family has a long history of it. They acquire prestige by burying anyone who might outshine them." He finally looked at Maya, and the contempt in his eyes softened into a profound, genuine respect. "Your mother was the diamond in the rough, Miss Rodriguez, and tonight you showed everyone just how brightly she deserved to shine." The unmasking was complete. It wasn't just Maya's talent that had been revealed. It was the ugly, hidden truth behind the glittering facade of the city's elite. Sterling Croft hadn't just lost a bet. He had lost control, he had lost face, and as he looked at Victoria's panicked expression and the calculating, predatory glint that was already returning to her eyes as she assessed the damage, he realized he was about to lose a whole lot more. The aftermath of the revelation hung in the air, thick and volatile. The party was effectively over. Small, quiet groups of guests were already making their excuses, murmuring to their spouses, eager to escape the epicenter of the social earthquake. The story was too good, too explosive to be contained within these four walls. By morning, it would be all over the city's gossip columns and social feeds. The billionaire, his corrupt fiancée, and the ghost of a composer, resurrected by her waitress daughter. Sterling Croft felt a desperate, clawing need to regain control. His entire life was built on the perception of power, and he could feel it bleeding out of him with every passing second. He saw his future, the merger he was planning, the public image he had so carefully curated, all cracking under the weight of this single disastrous evening. He did the only thing he knew how to do. He tried to buy his way out of the problem. He strode towards Maya, pulling out a sleek titanium checkbook and a fountain pen. He adopted a tone of magnanimous, if flustered, generosity. "Ms. Rodriguez," he began, his voice a little too loud, a little too strained. "That was quite a performance, a truly remarkable story." He clicked the pen. "Clearly you and your mother were wronged. That is, we would like to rectify that. Name your price. I will write you a check right now, enough to ensure you never have to serve another glass of champagne for the rest of your life." He was offering her hush money, attempting to reframe the narrative from one of his own humiliation to one of his noble patronage. Billionaire Sterling Croft discovers hidden talent righting an old wrong. He could almost see the headline. Maya looked at the checkbook in his hand, then up at his desperate, sweating face. A month ago, a week ago, even an hour ago, the offer of a life-changing sum of money would have been a dream come true. It would have meant the best care for her father, an end to her crushing financial anxiety, a chance for her brother to go to a good college. But looking at him now, she felt nothing but a profound, pitying contempt. He still didn't get it. He thought his money was the most powerful thing in the room. He was wrong. "You think this was about money?" she asked, her voice quiet, but carrying a weight that silenced him completely. It wasn't the voice of a victim. It was the voice of a judge delivering a verdict. She took a step closer, and it was Sterling who instinctively flinched back. "You brought me up here tonight to be your clown, Mr. Croft. You wanted to mock me, to prove that people like me, the people who clean your floors and serve your food, are worthless. You wanted to show your friends that you're a winner, and that compassion is for losers." Her eyes were clear and steady. There was no anger in them, only a devastating clarity. "That piano to you is a status symbol. It's just another expensive object you own, like your art or your fiancé. But to my mother, her piano was her voice. It was her sanctuary. It was the only thing in the world that made sense to her when nothing else did. You didn't just ask me to play a song. You asked me to desecrate her memory for a cheap laugh and a bet. She gestured toward the checkbook with a dismissive wave of her hand. Keep your money, Mr. Croft. It's worthless. It can't buy you class. It can't buy you dignity. And it can't buy you out of the hole you've just dug for yourself. My mother's music was never for sale, and neither is her story. With that, she turned her back on him, a final damning dismissal. The public shaming was absolute. Sterling stood there, checkbook in hand, utterly neutered. He had been stripped bare, not by shouting or hysterics, but by the quiet, unassailable power of dignity. He felt a presence beside him. It was Victoria. Her face was a frozen mask of fury. "You are an idiot!" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for him. "You couldn't have just picked the busboy. You had to create a citywide scandal that has my family's name right in the middle of it. Our prenup has a public image clause, Sterling. My lawyers will be in touch." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned on her heel and marched away, her posture rigid already in damage control mode, cutting her losses. Sterling was no longer an asset. He was a liability. Across the room, Sebastian Blackwood and Arthur Kensington were talking quietly with Maya. Their demeanor was one of deep respect. "Ms. Rodriguez," Sebastian began, his tone gentle. "I cannot apologize enough for what my acquaintance put you through tonight." "He didn't put me through it," Maya corrected him softly. "He gave me a stage. I chose what to do with it." A slow smile spread across Sebastian's face. "Indeed, my offer from earlier stands, though it is no longer part of a wager. My family's foundation would be honored to finance the complete recording and publication of your mother's entire catalogue of work. We will establish a trust in her name, the Sophia Rodriguez Foundation, to support other overlooked and underfunded musicians." Arthur Kensington nodded eagerly. "And the New York Times will run a feature, a front-page story on the arts section, The Lost Composer. We'll tell her story, your story. This is bigger than just a concert, my dear. This is about rewriting a chapter of music history." He paused, then looked at her with kind, earnest eyes. "And what about you? This isn't just about your mother's legacy. You have a gift, a tremendous world-class gift. What do you want?" For the first time all night, Maya felt a flicker of the old fear. The future, which had been a straight, narrow path of survival, had just exploded into 1,000 branching possibilities. The weight of that freedom was almost as terrifying as the weight of her old obligations. She thought of her father, of her promise to take care of him. She thought of the years of silent practice on a cardboard keyboard. "I want to play," she said, the words feeling new and powerful on her tongue. "I want to bring my mother's music to the world. And then I want to find my own." Sebastian Blackwood nodded, a look of profound understanding on his face. He wasn't offering her pity or charity. He was offering her an opportunity, a partnership. It was a different kind of power, one built not on acquisition and dominance, but on creation and respect. Maya looked around the opulent room one last time. It no longer felt intimidating. It was just a room filled with hollow things. She had walked in here as a servant, invisible and voiceless. She would walk out as the keeper of a legacy, her future, an unwritten symphony. She turned to Mr. Harrison, the head of staff, who was watching from the doorway, with a small secret smile on his face, and simply said, "I believe my shift is over." 6 months later, the city was blanketed in a crisp, late-autumn chill. But inside the hallowed walls of Carnegie Hall, the air was electric with warmth and anticipation. The velvet seats of the main auditorium, the Isaac Stern stage, were filled to capacity. Tonight was not just another concert. It was an event. The posters outside, simple and elegant, featured a striking black-and-white photograph of a woman with intense, soulful eyes under the words, "The music of Sofia Rodriguez, an unveiling." Backstage in a dressing room that was larger than her entire Queen's apartment, Maya Rodriguez stood in front of a full-length mirror. Though she wasn't really seeing her reflection. She was wearing a simple, elegant gown of deep emerald green, a gift from Sebastian Blackwood. Her hair was styled simply, and her only jewelry was a small silver locket containing a tiny picture of her mother. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind. True to his word, Sebastian had established the Sofia Rodriguez Foundation. Musicologists funded by the grant had helped Maya sort through the treasure trove of compositions her mother had left behind in dusty boxes, symphonies, concertos, sonatas, and dozens of elegies, each more beautiful and complex than the last. Arthur Kensington's front-page story had created a firestorm of interest, turning Sofia Rodriguez into a posthumous superstar and a symbol of artistic injustice. The Davenport grant had been disgraced, and Victoria's father had been forced to step down from the board amidst the scandal. Maya had spent weeks in a state-of-the-art recording studio, painstakingly bringing her mother's work to life. The first album, featuring the now famous Elegy for a Lost Star, had been released to universal critical acclaim and was already being hailed as a modern classic. But tonight was the true test, the culmination of it all. Playing for a microphone was one thing. Playing for a live audience at Carnegie Hall was another. There was a soft knock on the door. It was Sebastian. He wasn't dressed in a tuxedo, but a well-tailored dark suit. He had become a quiet, constant presence in her life, a patron, a mentor, and slowly a friend. "They're ready for you," he said, his smile calm and reassuring. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Maya admitted, a genuine smile touching her lips. "And alive. More alive than I've ever been." "Your father is in the second row, right where you can see him," Sebastian said. "He wouldn't stop crying when we brought him in. He's so proud, Maya." The foundation had ensured her father was moved to the best medical facility in the state, his care fully covered. Her brother was now enrolled at Columbia, studying business. The weight she had carried for so long had been lifted, leaving her free to simply be a musician. "And your other fan is watching too," Sebastian added, a hint of irony in his tone. He nodded toward a small television in the corner of the room, which was tuned to a local news channel. On the screen was a live shot from outside the concert hall, and then the screen cut to a pre-recorded business segment. The headline read, "Croft Industries stock plummets amidst hostile takeover bid," and the reporter was detailing the spectacular fall of Sterling Croft. After his engagement to Victoria Davenport imploded so publicly, his reputation for ruthless invincibility had been shattered. Confidence in his leadership had eroded, and a coalition of rival companies, quietly orchestrated by Sebastian Blackwood, had launched a successful takeover. The report showed a recent photo of Sterling leaving a courthouse. He looked gaunt, diminished, a king deposed. He had lost his company, his fiancée, and his carefully constructed aura of power. He was just a rich man now, no longer an emperor. Maya watched the screen for a moment, but felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Sterling Croft was a ghost from another lifetime. He was the catalyst, the crude flint that had struck the spark, but the fire had been hers and her mother's all along. His fate was irrelevant to her. "It's time," she said, turning away from the television. Sebastian nodded. "Your mother is with you tonight, Maya. Go and say what you need to say." She walked out of the dressing room and stood in the wings, waiting for her cue. The stage manager gave her a thumbs up. She could hear the murmur of the crowd, the rustle of programs, the palpable hum of anticipation. She looked down at her hands. They were no longer the hands of a waitress, calloused and tired. They were the hands of a concert pianist. Strong, steady, and ready. She walked onto the stage. A brilliant, warm spotlight found her. The applause was instantaneous and deafening. As she walked toward the magnificent Steinway grand piano at the center of the stage, she scanned the audience. She saw Arthur Kensington in the front row, beaming like a proud father. She saw her own father, his face wet with tears, his eyes shining with a love that filled her heart to bursting. She sat down at the piano and waited for the applause to die down. The silence that followed was different from the silence at the penthouse. That had been a silence of expectation and judgment. This was a silence of reverence and love. She placed her hands on the keys. She wasn't playing for revenge. She wasn't playing to prove a point. She was playing for the little girl who had found sanctuary in the music. She was playing for her father in the second row, and she was playing for the lost star who had given her the sky. She took a breath, closed her eyes, and began a new overture. Her own. That night, a waitress didn't just play the piano. She rewrote her destiny. Maya's story is a powerful reminder that true worth isn't measured by the balance in your bank account or the label on your suit, but by the fire in your soul, and the courage to let it burn brightly, even when the world tries to extinguish it. She walked into that party as a ghost, but walked out as a legend, proving that talent, dignity, and the love passed down through generations are powers that no amount of money can ever buy or silence. If this story of triumph and justice moved you, and if you believe in the hidden magic within ordinary people, please give this video a like and share it with others who need to hear that their voice matters. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true life dramas that will inspire and stay with you long after the story ends.